My name is Michael Waverly, and I used to believe in family dinners. Every Sunday at 2 o'clock sharp, we'd gather around my mother's mahogany table like some Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Mom would fuss over the roast beef, my wife Sandra would compliment the china, and my stepfather Richard would hold court with his stories from the bench. 30 years of judicial wisdom, he'd say, teaches you to read people like open books. Turns out, he was right about that last part. I just wish I'd learned to read sooner. I'm a structural engineer by trade, which means I spend my days calculating load-bearing capacities and stress points. Buildings don't lie to you. Steel beams don't smile at your face while plotting behind your back. Concrete doesn't call you honey while planning your destruction. If I'd known what I know now, I might have stuck to bridges and skyscrapers. At least when they collapse, you can see it coming. The Sunday that changed everything started like all the others. I pulled into Mom's driveway at exactly 1:55 because Elizabeth Waverly ran her household with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. Sandra's silver BMW was already there, parked next to Richard's black Mercedes. My wife always arrived early to help with preparations, though I'd never seen her lift anything heavier than a wine glass. "Michael, darling," Mom's voice carried from the kitchen as I let myself in through the front door. The house smelled like rosemary and garlic, the same combination that had greeted me every Sunday for the past 15 years. "We're just finishing up in here." I found them clustered around the kitchen island, Mom in her floral apron, Sandra perched on a bar stool with a glass of Chardonnay, and Richard leaning against the counter with that easy smile that had charmed voters for 3 decades. The perfect family tableau. "There's my boy," Richard said, extending his hand for our customary shake. His grip was firm, confident, the handshake of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. "How's the engineering business treating you?" "Can't complain," I replied, accepting the beer Mom pressed into my hand. "Buildings keep needing to stay upright, so job security's pretty solid." Sandra laughed, that musical sound that had first attracted me at a charity fundraiser 12 years ago. "Michael and his dry humor," she said, sliding off the bar stool to kiss my cheek. "I was just telling Uncle Dick about the Henderson project." Uncle Dick. She'd been calling him that since our wedding day, when Richard had insisted on the familiar title. "Makes us feel like real family," he'd said, wrapping Sandra in one of his paternal hugs. At the time, I'd thought it was sweet. Now, the memory made my stomach turn. "The Henderson project?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "That's the downtown renovation, isn't it?" 40-story mixed use, I confirmed. Office space, retail, residential. Should be finished next spring. "Impressive." Richard nodded approvingly. "I remember when that area was nothing but warehouses and dive bars. Progress marches on, doesn't it?" We moved to the dining room for the meal, settling into our usual seats. Mom at the head of the table, Richard to her right, Sandra across from him, and me at the foot. The seating arrangement had evolved naturally over the years, but now I wondered if there had been strategy behind it. Sandra and Richard could exchange glances without me noticing, could play footsie under the table while I carved the roast. "This looks wonderful, Elizabeth," Sandra said, spreading her napkin across her lap. "You've outdone yourself again." "Oh, it's nothing special," Mom replied, though she beamed at the compliment. "Just a simple Sunday roast." There was nothing simple about it. The table groaned under the weight of roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, roasted vegetables, and enough side dishes to feed a small army. Mom had been cooking like this since Dad passed away 20 years ago, as if she could fill the empty spaces with food and conversation. "So, Sandra," Richard said, cutting into his beef with surgical precision, "how are things at the nonprofit? Still saving the world one grant application at a time?" Sandra's laugh was lighter this time, more intimate. "Hardly saving the world, Uncle Dick. Just trying to make sure underprivileged kids have access to arts education. Someone has to fight for culture in this increasingly barbaric world." I watched them over my wine glass, noting the way Richard's eyes crinkled when Sandra spoke. the way she leaned forward slightly when addressing him. Small things, meaningless things, the kind of details that only matter when you're looking for them. Michael's been working such long hours lately, Sandra continued, her hand finding mine across the table. I barely see him anymore. Thank goodness for family dinners, or I'd forget what he looks like. The Henderson project has been demanding, I admitted. But it should ease up once we finish the structural analysis. All work and no play, Richard chuckled, raising his glass. Though I suppose someone has to keep the buildings from falling down. To Michael, the man who keeps us all safe and sound. We clinked glasses, and I caught something in Richard's expression, a flicker of amusement maybe, or satisfaction, like a man enjoying a private joke. The conversation flowed through its familiar channels: Mom's garden, Richard's golf game, Sandra's latest fundraising triumph, my work challenges. We were a family orchestra playing the same comfortable symphony we'd performed for years. But now I was hearing discordant notes, catching rhythms that didn't quite match. Remember when Michael first brought Sandra home? Mom said, refilling our wine glasses. I knew immediately she was special. The way she lit up the room made everyone feel so comfortable. She certainly made an impression, Richard agreed, his gaze lingering on Sandra's face. Some people just have that natural warmth, that ability to make others feel appreciated. Sandra blushed prettily. You're both too kind. I just felt so welcomed into this family, like I'd found where I truly belonged. The words were innocent enough, but something in her tone made me look up sharply. Sandra was staring at Richard with an expression I'd seen before, usually in our bedroom during our early marriage. Soft, vulnerable, intimate. The look of a woman who felt truly seen. More wine, anyone? Mom asked, already reaching for the bottle. I'll get it, Richard said, standing smoothly. This old bottle's getting heavy for delicate hands. As he moved around the table, his hand brushed Sandra's shoulder, a brief contact, barely noticeable. Sandra's eyes fluttered closed for just a moment, and a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Just a creeping awareness that the family dinner I'd been attending for 15 years might not be the one actually happening. So, Michael, Richard said, settling back into his chair, any exciting plans for the rest of the weekend? Just the usual, I replied, watching Sandra smooth her hair where Richard's fingers had grazed her shoulder. Catch up on some reading, maybe work in the garage. Such a homebody, Sandra said fondly. I keep telling him we should get out more, but he's perfectly content with his books and his tools. Nothing wrong with being a creature of habit, Richard observed, though a little adventure now and then keeps life interesting. Again, that private smile, that sense of hidden meaning dancing just beneath the surface of ordinary conversation. We finished dinner with Mom's famous apple pie and coffee, the talk turning to neighborhood gossip and local politics. Richard held forth on the declining standards of the current judicial system, while Sandra nodded thoughtfully and asked intelligent questions. They made a good team, I realized. Complementary personalities, shared interests, easy rapport. Too easy, maybe. Well, I said, checking my watch, I should probably head home. Early morning tomorrow. Of course, dear, Mom said, rising to clear the plates. Sandra, would you mind helping me with these dishes? Actually, Sandra said, glancing at Richard, I promised Uncle Dick I'd take a look at his new car. He's been raving about it all afternoon. The BMW? Richard's face lit up. I'd love to show it off. German engineering at its finest. Michael, you'd appreciate the precision of it. Maybe next time, I said, kissing Mom's cheek. I really do need to get going. I left them there. Mom gathering plates, Sandra following Richard toward the garage, their voices fading into the comfortable murmur of family conversation. Just another Sunday dinner with the Waverleys, nothing unusual or suspicious about any of it, except for the way Sandra's hand had lingered on Richard's arm as they walked away. The way she'd looked back at me with something that might have been guilt, or relief, or anticipation. I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, past houses where other families were probably finishing their own Sunday dinners. Normal families, I told myself. Families where stepdaughters didn't look at stepfathers like they held the secrets of the universe, where wives didn't find excuses to arrive early and stay late at their mother-in-law's house. Our house sat dark and empty, waiting for Sandra's return. I'd bought it for us 5 years ago, a colonial in a good neighborhood with mature trees and friendly neighbors, the kind of place where you raised children and grew old together. We'd talked about kids in those early days, but Sandra's career had always taken precedence. Maybe next year, she'd say, when things settled down at the office. Now I wondered if there had been other reasons for the delays, other priorities I hadn't known about. I settled into my home office with a beer and the structural plans for the Henderson project, trying to lose myself in calculations and load distributions. Numbers didn't lie. Steel didn't betray you. If you did the math right, everything held together exactly as it should. Sandra came home around 10, her cheeks flushed from the cool evening air. "Sorry I'm so late," she called from the hallway. "Uncle Dick's car really is incredible. We ended up taking it for a drive around the lake." "Nice," I called back, not looking up from my blueprints. She appeared in the doorway, still wearing the blue dress she'd chosen for dinner. It was one of Richard's favorites, I realized. He'd complimented it at least 3 times during the meal. "You're working late," she observed. "Just reviewing some calculations. Want to make sure everything's solid before we pour the foundation." Sandra moved behind my chair, her hands settling on my shoulders. Her touch felt different somehow, perfunctory, like she was going through the motions of being a wife. "You work too hard," she murmured, pressing a brief kiss to the top of my head. "I'm going to take a shower and head to bed. Don't stay up too late." I listened to her footsteps on the stairs, the sound of running water, the familiar nighttime routine of a marriage. But as I sat there surrounded by my blueprints and calculations, I couldn't shake the feeling that the foundation of my own life might not be as solid as I'd thought. Buildings collapse when their structural integrity is compromised, when the load-bearing elements can no longer support the weight they're carrying. The process usually starts small, a crack in the foundation, a beam that's been weakened by time or stress. Then one day, without warning, everything comes crashing down. I closed my laptop and headed upstairs, where Sandra was already asleep, her back turned to my side of the bed. She looked peaceful in the moonlight streaming through our bedroom window. Innocent, like a woman with nothing to hide. But as I lay there in the darkness, listening to her steady breathing, I couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd looked at Richard, the way her hand had lingered on his arm, the way she'd called him Uncle Dick with such easy familiarity, as if the word meant something more than just family courtesy. Some structures are designed to withstand enormous stress. Others crumble at the first sign of pressure. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I found myself wondering which kind of marriage Sandra and I had built together. I was about to find out. Monday morning arrived with the reliable predictability of suburban routine. Sandra left for her office at the Children's Arts Foundation at 7:30 sharp, coffee mug in one hand, designer handbag in the other, dropping a distracted kiss on my cheek as she hurried past. "Late meeting tonight," she called from the garage. "Don't wait up." The BMW's engine purred to life, and she was gone, leaving me alone with my morning coffee and a growing sense of unease I couldn't quite name. Everything seemed normal on the surface, the same kitchen, the same routine, the same marriage we'd been living for 12 years. But sometimes the most dangerous cracks are the ones you can't see. I drove to the office through morning traffic, my mind replaying yesterday's dinner like a film I was trying to analyze frame by frame. Sandra's laugh when Richard told his courthouse stories, the way she'd leaned forward when he spoke, that moment when his hand brushed her shoulder and she'd closed her eyes like she was savoring the contact. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe 15 years of marriage had made me paranoid, seeing threats where none existed. Maybe Sandra really had just wanted to admire Richard's new car. "You look like someone who lost a bet with gravity," Ray Martinez said, dropping into the chair across from my desk with his usual morning coffee. Ray had been my closest friend at Henderson Engineering for the past 8 years, a fellow structural engineer with a talent for reading people almost as well as he read blueprints. "Just tired," I replied, spreading the Henderson project plans across my desk. "Long weekend." "Ah, the dreaded family dinner." Ray nodded knowingly. "How's the sainted stepfather? Still dispensing wisdom from his judicial throne?" "Richard's fine, same as always." "And the lovely Sandra? Still saving the world one underprivileged kid at a time?" Something in Ray's tone made me look up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Nothing." Ray held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just making conversation. Though I have to say, your wife's gotten even more beautiful lately. There's something different about her. A kind of glow." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "Different how?" "I don't know. Happier, maybe? More confident? Like a woman who's discovered something wonderful about herself." Ray shrugged. "Whatever it is, it suits her." I stared at the blueprints without seeing them, Ray's words echoing in my head. A glow. A new confidence. The kind of change that comes from feeling desired, appreciated, special. The kind of transformation that happens when someone makes you feel like the most important person in their world. "Michael? You okay, man?" "Fine," I said, forcing my attention back to the structural calculations. "Just thinking about load distributions." Ray studied me for a moment longer, then seemed to decide not to push. "Well, when you're done contemplating the mysteries of concrete and steel, the Henderson people want to review our progress. Meeting at 2. The morning crawled by in a haze of technical drawings and stress analyses. I tried to focus on the work, but my mind kept wandering to Sandra and Richard, the way they'd looked at each other, the casual intimacy of their interaction, the feeling that I'd been watching a performance designed specifically for my benefit. At lunch, I found myself driving past the Children's Arts Foundation instead of heading to my usual sandwich shop. Sandra's BMW sat in the parking lot, right where it should be. Nothing suspicious about that. She was at work, doing her job, probably in meetings about grant applications and program development. So why did I feel like I was missing something important? I parked across the street and called her cell phone. "Hi, honey." Sandra's voice was slightly breathless, like she'd been hurrying. "What's up?" "Just wanted to see if you'd like to grab lunch. I'm in your neighborhood." "Oh, that's sweet, but I can't. I'm swamped with the quarterly reports and I've got back-to-back meetings all afternoon." A pause. "Rain check?" "Sure. See you tonight." "Actually, remember I mentioned that late meeting? It's a dinner thing with potential donors. I probably won't be home until after 10. Another late meeting. Sandra had been having a lot of those lately. Board dinners, donor cultivation events, strategic planning sessions that stretched well into the evening. The nonprofit world was demanding, she'd explained. Building relationships took time. "Okay," I said. "I'll probably just grab something on the way home." "You're the best. Love you." The line went quiet, and I sat there staring at Sandra's office building, trying to shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with this picture. My wife was at work. She had evening meetings. These were normal parts of her professional life. Except that as I watched, Sandra emerged from the building and got into her car. Alone. At 12:45 in the afternoon, when she'd just told me she was too busy for lunch. I followed her BMW through downtown traffic, staying back far enough to avoid detection. This was insane, I told myself. I was spying on my own wife, based on nothing more than paranoid suspicion, and Ray's casual observation about her newfound glow. But I kept following, anyway. Sandra drove to the Riverside Hotel, one of the city's most elegant establishments, the kind of place where business executives entertained important clients and wealthy couples celebrated anniversaries. She pulled into the valet parking area and handed her keys to a uniformed attendant like she'd done it 100 times before. I parked across the street and watched her walk through the hotel's glass doors, her stride confident and purposeful. She wasn't meeting donors for lunch. She wasn't trapped in quarterly reports. She was walking into an upscale hotel in the middle of a Monday afternoon, and she'd lied to me about it. My phone buzzed with a text message from Richard. Lunch meeting ran long. Won't be home until evening. Don't let Elizabeth worry. The timestamp showed 12:52 p.m., 7 minutes after Sandra had entered the hotel. I sat in my car for another hour, watching the hotel entrance and trying to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Maybe Sandra really was meeting donors. Maybe Richard's lunch meeting was at the same hotel. Maybe I was connecting dots that didn't actually form a picture. At 2:15, they emerged together. Sandra appeared first, checking her phone as she waited for the valet to retrieve her car. She looked relaxed, satisfied, like a woman who'd just enjoyed a particularly good meal. Richard followed a few minutes later, adjusting his tie and smoothing his silver hair. He didn't approach Sandra, didn't acknowledge her presence. They were strangers sharing the same hotel entrance, nothing more. But I'd seen the way Sandra had glanced back at him before getting into her car, the small smile that played at the corners of her mouth, the look of a woman who'd just shared something intimate and was already anticipating the next opportunity. I drove back to the office in a daze, mechanically navigating traffic while my world rearranged itself around this new reality. My wife was having an affair with my stepfather, the man who'd married my mother, who'd been part of our family for 20 years, who shook my hand every Sunday and called me son. The Henderson meeting passed in a blur of technical discussions and project timelines. I nodded at appropriate moments, answered questions about structural integrity and construction schedules, played the role of competent engineer, while my personal life crumbled like a building with a compromised foundation. Great work, Michael, the client said as we wrapped up. Your attention to detail is exactly what this project needs. Attention to detail. If only I'd been paying attention to the right details, like the way Sandra had started working late 3 months ago, the new clothes she'd been buying, the subtle changes in her behavior that I'd attributed to career stress or natural evolution. I stayed late at the office, poring over blueprints and trying to lose myself in the mathematical certainty of structural engineering. But even concrete and steel couldn't distract me from the image of Sandra and Richard emerging from that hotel, their carefully orchestrated separation fooling no one except the husband who wasn't supposed to be watching. Sandra came home at 10:30, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly mussed despite her claims of a business dinner. How was the donor meeting? I asked from the living room, where I'd been pretending to read. Productive, she replied, kicking off her heels in the hallway. We might have secured funding for the summer arts camp. Cross your fingers. She moved through our house like an actress hitting her marks, hanging up her jacket, checking her phone, performing the routine of a wife returning from a legitimate business obligation. But I could see the performance now, the careful way she avoided my eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she poured herself a glass of wine. That's great news, I said. Richard texted that his lunch meeting ran long too. Busy day for everyone. Sandra's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. Oh? I didn't realize Uncle Dick had meetings today. The lie came so easily, so naturally, that I almost admired her skill. Almost. Seemed like it was important, I continued, watching her face. He said not to let Mom worry. Well, you know how dedicated he is to his consulting work. Even in retirement, he can't seem to slow down. Another lie, delivered with the same casual confidence. I wondered how many others I'd missed over the past few months. How many late meetings and business dinners and chance encounters had actually been carefully planned deceptions. I'm exhausted, Sandra said, finishing her wine in 2 quick swallows. I think I'll head up to bed. I'll be up soon. Just want to finish this chapter. She kissed the top of my head, the same perfunctory gesture she'd been offering for months. But now I could smell something different in her hair, a masculine cologne that definitely wasn't mine. After she went upstairs, I sat in the darkened living room and tried to process what I'd learned. My wife was cheating on me, with my stepfather. They were meeting at hotels in the middle of the day, lying to their respective spouses, carrying on an affair that made a mockery of everything I'd believed about my marriage and my family. The smart thing would be to confront them, demand explanations, file for divorce, and try to salvage whatever dignity remained. But something held me back. Maybe it was the engineer in me, the part that needed complete structural analysis before making any major decisions. Or maybe it was the growing realization that Sandra and Richard had played me for a fool, and I wanted to understand exactly how they'd done it before I decided what to do about it. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number Ray had given me months ago. Alistair Finch, private investigator. Best divorce attorney's secret weapon in the city, Ray had said. Guy can find out what you had for breakfast 3 weeks ago. At the time, I'd laughed and deleted the contact information. Now I was grateful Ray had insisted I keep it. I stared at Finch's number for a long time, my thumb hovering over the call button. Once I made this call, there would be no going back. No pretending I hadn't seen what I'd seen. No more Sunday dinners with the happy Waverly family. But there was no going back anyway. The foundation had already cracked. The question now was whether I wanted to understand the full extent of the damage before everything came crashing down. I made the call. Alistair Finch's office occupied the 3rd floor of a downtown building that had seen better decades. The elevator wheezed and groaned like an old man climbing stairs, and the hallway smelled of industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. Not exactly the sleek, high-tech operation I'd expected from Ray's glowing recommendation. Finch himself was equally unimpressive at first glance. Mid-50s, average height, the kind of forgettable face that probably served him well in his line of work. But his eyes were sharp and calculating, the eyes of a man who'd spent decades cataloging human weakness and deception. "Mr. Waverly," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his cluttered desk. "Ray Martinez speaks highly of you. Says you're one of the good guys." "Ray's a friend," I replied, settling into the worn leather chair. "He thought you might be able to help me with a situation. Marital situation, I'm guessing. They usually are, in my experience." Finch leaned back in his chair, studying me with those keen eyes. "Let me guess. Wife's been working late, new clothes, mysterious phone calls, general change in behavior?" "Something like that. And you want to know for sure before you do anything drastic. Smart man. Too many people act on suspicion and end up looking like paranoid fools. Better to have facts." I told him about Sandra and Richard, about the hotel sighting and the coordinated lies. Finch listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Your stepfather," he said when I finished. "That's a new one. I've seen affairs with brothers-in-law, business partners, kids' soccer coaches. But the stepfather-in-law? That's some serious boundary crossing. Can you prove it? If it's happening, I can prove it. Question is, how much proof do you want? Basic confirmation that they're meeting, photos, video, audio recordings. The more evidence you want, the more it's going to cost." "I want everything," I said without hesitation. "If I'm going to destroy my marriage and my family, I want to know exactly what I'm destroying it for." Finch quoted his rates, which were substantial but not unreasonable for what amounted to the complete documentation of my personal catastrophe. We signed a contract, and he handed me a business card with a phone number written on the back. "That's my direct line," he said. 24 hours a day. This kind of thing can move fast once we start poking around." I drove back to work with a strange sense of relief. For the first time in days, I felt like I was taking action instead of just absorbing damage. Whatever Sandra and Richard were doing, I'd soon have proof. Then I could decide how to respond. The next few days passed in a surreal haze of normalcy. Sandra continued her routine of early departures and late returns, always with plausible explanations for her absence. Richard maintained his usual schedule of golf games and consulting meetings, calling Mom every evening to check in like the devoted husband he appeared to be. And I played along, attending our usual social obligations and family gatherings as if nothing had changed. Wednesday dinner with the Hendersons, Thursday drinks with Sandra's nonprofit colleagues, Friday night at Mom and Richard's for their weekly movie night. "You seem distracted lately," Mom said as we settled in to watch some romantic comedy Sandra had chosen. "Everything okay at work?" "Just the usual stress," I replied, accepting the bowl of popcorn she offered. "Big project, tight deadlines." "Michael works too hard," Sandra said from her spot on the couch next to Richard. "I keep telling him he needs to learn to delegate." "Delegation is an art form," Richard observed, his arm draped casually along the back of the couch behind Sandra. "You have to know who you can trust with important responsibilities." They were sitting closer than usual, I noticed. Not obviously so, but close enough that Sandra could feel the warmth of Richard's body, could catch his cologne when he moved. Close enough for their hands to brush when reaching for popcorn. "Trust is everything," Sandra agreed, her voice soft and intimate. "Once you find someone who truly understands you, who appreciates what you have to offer." She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. At least it was clear to me, and probably to Richard. Mom remained obliviously focused on the movie, commenting on the actors' wardrobes and predicting plot twists. My phone buzzed with a text from Finch. "Call me tomorrow. We need to talk." I slept poorly that night, my dreams filled with hotel corridors and hidden cameras, with Sandra and Richard laughing at my naivety while they planned their next rendezvous. When morning came, I was almost grateful to escape to the office. Finch answered his phone on the first ring. "We've got them," he said without preamble. "Hotel meetings twice this week, always the same pattern. She arrives first, he follows 10 minutes later. They stay for exactly 2 hours, then leave separately." My stomach dropped. Hearing the confirmation was different from suspecting, worse somehow. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "Based on hotel records, at least 4 months. Probably longer, but they've been using the Riverside consistently since March. Always the same room, always charged to a credit card registered to a consulting firm that traces back to your stepfather. 4 months. While I'd been working late on the Henderson project, Sandra and Richard had been building their own secret world, planning meetings, coordinating schedules, lying to their respective spouses with practiced ease. "I want to see the evidence," I said. "Can you meet this afternoon? I've got photos, video, financial records, the whole package." We met at a coffee shop near my office, Finch arriving with a manila envelope thick enough to contain the complete destruction of my marriage. He spread the contents across our corner table like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. The photos were damning, but not explicit. Sandra and Richard entering the hotel separately, riding the elevator together, emerging hours later with the satisfied expressions of people who'd just shared something intensely pleasurable. The timestamps told the story of a well-orchestrated affair, meetings scheduled around my work commitments and Mom's social calendar. "They're careful," Finch observed. "Professional, almost. No public displays of affection, no careless mistakes. This isn't a crime of passion. It's a calculated relationship." The financial records were equally revealing. Richard had been paying for the hotel room, but also for Sandra's new wardrobe, her spa treatments, even her car payments. He was essentially keeping her as a mistress while maintaining his marriage to my mother. "There's something else," Finch said, sliding another photograph across the table. "This was taken yesterday afternoon." The image showed Sandra and Richard in what appeared to be a jewelry store, examining something in a display case. Sandra's face was animated, excited, while Richard spoke to the sales clerk with the air of a man making an expensive purchase. "Looks like he's buying her something special," Finch said. "Anniversary gift, maybe? Or a promise of some kind." I stared at the photo, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. This wasn't just about physical attraction or midlife crisis. Richard was courting Sandra, romancing her, making her feel like the most important woman in his world, and she was letting him. "What do you want to do with this?" Finch asked, gathering the photos back into the envelope. "I need to think about it." "Don't think too long. In my experience, these things have a way of escalating. Right now, it's just an affair. But people in this situation start making bigger decisions. Divorce, remarriage, running away together. You want to control the narrative before they write their own ending." I drove home that evening with the envelope on the passenger seat, its contents burning like radioactive material. Sandra's car was already in the driveway, which surprised me. She'd been getting home later and later as the affair intensified. I found her in the kitchen, preparing what looked like an elaborate dinner, candles on the table, wine breathing in a decanter, the good china that usually only appeared for special occasions. "What's all this?" I asked, hanging my jacket on the back of a chair. "I realized we haven't had a proper dinner together in weeks," Sandra said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I thought it would be nice to reconnect, just the two of us." She was nervous, I realized. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged flowers in a vase, and she kept glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "Smells wonderful," I said, playing along. "What's the occasion?" "Do we need an occasion to enjoy each other's company?" Sandra's smile was bright but brittle. I love you, Michael. I want you to know that. Whatever else happens, I want you to remember that I love you." The words hit me like a physical blow. This was a goodbye dinner. Sandra was preparing to leave me, and she wanted one last perfect evening to ease her conscience or preserve her memories. We ate in relative silence, making small talk about work and weather, while the weight of unspoken truths pressed down on us like a collapsing ceiling. Sandra picked at her food, her usual appetite apparently diminished by whatever internal struggle she was fighting. "Michael," she said finally, setting down her fork, "if something were to happen to us, to our marriage, I want you to know it wouldn't be because I don't love you." "What kind of something?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I don't know. Hypothetically. People change, circumstances change. Sometimes even love isn't enough to keep two people together." She was preparing me, softening the blow of an announcement she planned to make soon. Maybe after Richard divorced Mom. Maybe after they'd figured out the financial arrangements and custody issues. "Are you trying to tell me something, Sandra?" "No," she said quickly. "No, I've been thinking about how fragile everything is, how quickly life can change. I want to make sure we appreciate what we have while we have it." After dinner, we went to bed early for the first time in months. Sandra made love to me with a desperate intensity that felt more like farewell than reconnection. Afterward, she cried quietly against my shoulder while I stared at the ceiling and tried to process the magnitude of her betrayal. She thought she was being kind, giving me one last perfect evening before she destroyed our marriage. But lying there in the darkness, listening to her sob out her guilt and anticipation, I felt something harder and colder than heartbreak settling in my chest. Sandra and Richard had been playing a game for months, using me and Mom as unwitting pawns while they pursued their own selfish desires. They'd made fools of us, laughed at our trust, planned our destruction with the casual efficiency of people who considered themselves superior to their victims. But games have rules, and players, and sometimes the person you think is a pawn turns out to be something much more dangerous. I held Sandra until her tears subsided and her breathing evened into sleep. Then I lay awake, planning my next move, the envelope of evidence burning like a promise in my home office downstairs. If Sandra and Richard wanted to play games with my family, I was ready to teach them some new rules. Richard's 60th birthday was 3 weeks away, and Mom had been planning the celebration for months. A formal dinner party at their house, she'd decided, with all the family and close friends who'd been part of Richard's life over the past 2 decades. Elegant catering, professional flowers, a photographer to capture the milestone for posterity. "It's going to be perfect," Mom gushed during our Thursday phone call. "Richard deserves something special. 60 years is such an achievement, and he's been such a wonderful husband and father figure." Father figure. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so nauseating. "What can Sandra and I do to help?" I asked, though I already had plans for my contribution to the festivities. "Oh, you're so sweet to offer. Actually, Richard mentioned he'd love to have one of those video montages. You know, old photos and family memories set to music. Do you think you could put something together? You're so good with technology." "A video montage. Perfect." "I'd be happy to," I said. "I'll need to collect photos from everyone, maybe some video clips if people have them. Make it really comprehensive." "That would be wonderful. Richard will be so touched." Touched. That was one word for it. I spent the next week gathering material for the birthday video, reaching out to family members and old friends for photos and memories. The legitimate part of the project was straightforward enough: Richard's childhood, his law school graduation, his wedding to Mom, various family celebrations over the years. But I was also working on a different kind of montage, with Alistair Finch's help. "Hotel security footage," Finch explained as we reviewed the material in his office. "Amazing what you can access when you know the right people and ask the right questions. Turns out your stepfather has been a very regular customer at the Riverside." The footage was damning. Multiple dates, multiple encounters, Sandra and Richard entering and leaving hotel rooms with the comfortable familiarity of an established couple. The timestamps created a timeline of deception that stretched back months, maybe longer. "The quality is excellent," Finch noted with professional satisfaction. "High-definition cameras, good lighting, clear facial recognition, no room for doubt or denial. Can you edit it together with the family photos? Create a seamless transition? You want to blindside them at the birthday party?" Finch raised an eyebrow. "That's cold, even by my standards. They've been blindsiding me for months. Turnabout seems fair. Your call. But once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. You'll destroy more than just their affair. Your mother, the extended family, everyone who thought they knew these people." I thought about Mom, about her excitement over the birthday party, her pride in her marriage and her family. She didn't deserve to be collateral damage in Richard and Sandra's selfish game. But she also didn't deserve to live a lie, to waste her remaining years on a man who was betraying her with her own daughter-in-law. "Do it," I said. The week before the party, Sandra's behavior became increasingly erratic. She was jumpy, distracted, prone to long phone conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room. She'd started working even later, sometimes not coming home until after midnight, always with elaborate explanations about donor cultivation and board meetings. "You seem stressed," I observed over breakfast on the Tuesday before Richard's party. "Maybe you should take a vacation after the birthday celebration. Get away somewhere relaxing." Sandra's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. "A vacation?" "Just a thought. You've been working so hard lately. A change of scenery might do you good." I can't really get away right now. Too many projects in development. Maybe later in the year." She was planning something. I could see it in the way she avoided my eyes, the nervous energy that kept her in constant motion. Maybe she and Richard were going to make their announcement at the party. Maybe they'd decided to come clean and deal with the consequences. If so, they were going to be disappointed by my reaction. "How's the video coming along?" Sandra asked, clearly eager to change the subject. "Almost finished. I think Richard's going to love it. Very revealing. That's nice. I'm sure he'll appreciate the effort you've put into it. The effort. She had no idea. Friday evening arrived with the crisp clarity of early autumn. Mom had transformed their house into an elegant party venue with professional lighting, floral arrangements that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, and enough food to feed a small army. The guest list included extended family, Richard's former colleagues from the courthouse, neighbors, and old friends, about 40 people total. The kind of gathering where reputations were made and destroyed, where social standing could shift dramatically based on a single evening's revelations. Perfect audience for what I had planned. Sandra spent extra time getting ready, choosing a black cocktail dress that I now realized was probably selected with Richard's preferences in mind. She looked beautiful, elegant, every inch the successful nonprofit executive and devoted wife. The performance was flawless. "You look stunning," I said, as she applied the finishing touches to her makeup. "Thank you." She smiled at me in the mirror, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with 12 years ago. Before the lies, before the betrayal, before she'd decided that her husband's stepfather was more appealing than her actual husband. Ready to celebrate Uncle Dick's big day? Something flickered in Sandra's expression at the nickname. Guilt, maybe, or anticipation. "It should be a lovely evening. Your mother's worked so hard to make it special." We arrived at Mom's house to find the party already in full swing. Richard held court near the fireplace, regaling a group of admirers with stories from his judicial career. He looked distinguished in his navy suit, every inch the respected retiree, celebrating a life well lived. He spotted us across the room and raised his glass in greeting, that familiar smile spreading across his face, the smile of a man who had everything under control, who'd successfully compartmentalized his life into public respectability and private indulgence. "Michael! Sandra!" He approached with arms outstretched, embracing Sandra perhaps a moment longer than strictly appropriate. "Thank you both for being here. This means the world to me." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, shaking his hand with perhaps more pressure than necessary. 60 years. Quite an achievement. "The best years are still ahead," Richard said, his eyes finding Sandra's face. "I'm looking forward to new adventures." New adventures. The phrase hung in the air between us, loaded with meaning that only I seemed to fully understand. The evening progressed through its predictable stages. Cocktails and conversation, followed by an elaborate dinner featuring all of Richard's favorite dishes. Mom beamed with pride as guests complimented her planning and organization, clearly delighted to be hosting such a successful celebration. "This is perfect, Elizabeth," Sandra said, squeezing Mom's hand. "Richard is so lucky to have you." The irony was breathtaking. Sandra praising Mom for being a devoted wife while simultaneously planning to steal her husband. The casual cruelty of it made my jaw clench. "We're all lucky to have each other," Mom replied, her eyes shining with happiness. "Family is everything." Family. Right. After dinner, I stood to address the gathering, tapping my wine glass to get everyone's attention. "If I could have everyone's attention," I began, waiting for the conversations to die down. "I'd like to say a few words about our guest of honor." Richard settled back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man about to receive well-deserved praise. Sandra watched from across the table, her hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of supportive attention. "Richard came into our family 20 years ago," I continued, "and he's been a constant presence ever since. A stepfather, a husband, a friend, someone we've all learned to trust and depend on." Murmurs of agreement from around the room. Richard nodded graciously, accepting the accolades as his due. "He's taught me a lot about integrity, about commitment, about the importance of family loyalty, and tonight, I want to share some of those lessons with all of you." I moved toward the entertainment center where Mom had set up the projection system for my video presentation. I put together a little tribute, I announced. A look back at Richard's life, his achievements, his relationships, the moments that have defined him as a man. The lights dimmed, and the projector hummed to life. The screen filled with images from Richard's childhood, his early career, his courtship of my mother. Sentimental music played softly in the background, and I heard appreciative murmurs from the audience. "Beautiful work, Michael," someone whispered. The montage continued through Richard's judicial career, his community involvement, his role as stepfather and grandfather. All perfectly normal, exactly what the guests expected to see. Then the music shifted. The family photos faded, replaced by security footage from the Riverside Hotel. The first image showed Sandra entering the hotel lobby, checking her phone as she walked toward the elevators. The timestamp read 3 weeks ago, 1:15 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, when she'd told me she was in budget meetings. A collective intake of breath from the audience. Someone's wine glass hit the floor with a crash that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. The footage continued. Richard entering the same lobby 10 minutes later, moving with the confident stride of a man who knew exactly where he was going. The elevator doors closing behind him, the timestamp advancing. "Michael!" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "What is this?" But I wasn't looking at Mom. I was watching Sandra and Richard, their faces frozen in expressions of absolute horror as their secret played out in high definition for everyone to see. More footage. Different dates. Same pattern. Sandra and Richard meeting at the hotel, their body language growing more intimate and familiar over time. Holding hands in the elevator. Kissing in the corridor outside their room. Emerging hours later with the satisfied expressions of lovers who'd just shared something beautiful and forbidden. The silence in the room was deafening. 40 people watching in stunned disbelief as the perfect family celebration transformed into a public trial. "Turn it off," Sandra whispered, her face white as paper. "Please, Michael, turn it off." But the footage kept rolling. Weeks of deception, months of betrayal, all documented in excruciating detail. The timestamps told the story of a systematic affair, carefully planned and expertly executed. Until now. Richard tried to stand, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor, but his legs seemed to have lost their strength. He sank back down, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "I can explain," he started, but his voice cracked on the words. "Explain what?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Explain how you've been screwing my wife for months while sitting at my mother's dinner table? Explain how you've been paying for hotel rooms and jewelry while pretending to be a devoted husband?" Mom made a sound that wasn't quite human, a keening wail that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest, the sound of a woman's heart breaking in real time. "Elizabeth." Richard reached for her, but she recoiled as if his touch would burn her. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't you dare touch me." The footage finally ended, the screen fading to black as the room erupted in chaos. Guests talking in shocked whispers, some heading for the exits, others pulling out phones to capture the aftermath of the most spectacular social disaster they'd ever witnessed. Sandra was crying now, mascara streaming down her cheeks as she looked around the room at the faces of people who'd thought they knew her. Friends, family members, professional colleagues, all staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to something that might have been pity. "Sandra," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the chaos. "Did you have anything you wanted to say? Any words for the birthday boy?" She looked at me with desperate eyes, her mouth moving soundlessly. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I'm sorry," she finally managed. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught?" She had no answer for that. Richard struggled to his feet, his face flushed red with shame and anger. "You had no right," he snarled at me. This is a private matter between consenting adults." "Private?" I laughed, and the sound was harsh enough to make several guests flinch. "You made it public the moment you decided to screw my wife in hotel rooms while lying to my mother. You made it my business when you turned my marriage into a joke and my family into a fraud." "Michael," Mom's voice was broken, barely audible. "Please, I can't. I need—" She stood on unsteady legs, her face gray with shock, and for a moment I thought she might collapse. Several guests moved to help her, but she waved them away with trembling hands. "I need everyone to leave," she whispered. "Please, just leave." The exodus was swift and awkward, guests grabbing coats and purses while avoiding eye contact with the three people who'd just destroyed their own lives in front of 40 witnesses. Within minutes, the house was empty, except for family. Mom sat in her chair like a broken doll, staring at nothing. Sandra huddled in the corner, still crying. Richard stood by the fireplace, his hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. 20 years, Mom said finally. 20 years I've been married to you. I trusted you. I loved you. I thought we were happy. Elizabeth, please listen to me, Richard began, but she cut him off with a gesture. How long? She asked. How long has this been going on? Sandra and Richard exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. 4 months, Sandra whispered. Longer, I corrected. The hotel records go back at least 6 months. Probably longer than that. Mom absorbed this information with the stoic acceptance of someone who'd already sustained the worst possible damage. Get out, she said quietly. Elizabeth, we need to talk about this, Richard protested. We need to work through— Get out! The words exploded from her with volcanic force, years of suppressed anger and betrayal erupting in a single moment. Get out of my house! Get out of my life! I never want to see either of you again! Richard looked like he might argue further, but something in Mom's expression stopped him. He straightened his tie, gathered what remained of his dignity, and walked toward the door. This isn't over, he said to me as he passed. You think you've won something here, but you have no idea what you've just destroyed. I know exactly what I've destroyed, I replied. The question is, do you? After he left, Sandra remained in her corner crying quietly. Mom had retreated into herself, staring at the wall with empty eyes. I should go, Sandra said finally. Yes, I agreed. You should. She looked at me with something that might have been hope. Michael, can we talk about this? Work something out? Talk about what? Work out what? You've been having an affair with my stepfather for months. You've lied to me, humiliated me, destroyed my family. What exactly is there to work out? I love you, she whispered. I know you don't believe that, but I do love you. No, I said firmly. You love the idea of me, the security I represent, the respectability, the comfortable life, but you don't love me. If you loved me, you never would have done this. Sandra gathered her purse and coat, moving like a woman in a dream. At the door, she turned back one more time. What happens now? Now you live with the consequences of your choices. Both of you. After she left, I sat with Mom in the wreckage of the birthday party. The elegant decorations looked ridiculous now, festive reminders of a celebration that had turned into a funeral. I'm sorry, I said finally. I know this wasn't the way you wanted to find out. Mom was quiet for a long time, her hands folded in her lap like a child's. I knew, she said eventually. Not consciously, but I knew something was wrong. The way they looked at each other, the way they talked. I told myself I was imagining things. You couldn't have known how far it had gone. Couldn't I? She looked at me with eyes that seemed to have aged years in a single evening. I'm not stupid, Michael. I didn't want to see it. I wanted to believe I still had a marriage worth saving. We sat in silence for a while, surrounded by the debris of our shattered family. Outside, I could hear cars starting as the last guests departed, probably already calling friends and family to share the shocking news of Richard Waverley's spectacular downfall. By morning, everyone would know. By next week, it would be the scandal that defined our social circle for years to come. Richard's reputation would be destroyed, Sandra's career would be over, and Mom would be the object of sympathy and gossip in equal measure. But as I sat there in the ruins of Richard's 60th birthday party, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: satisfaction. Not happiness, exactly, but the grim contentment of a job well done. Sandra and Richard had played their game with skill and cunning, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated their opponent. Now they were about to learn that in any game, the person who controls the rules usually wins. The video went viral by Sunday morning. Someone at the party, probably Richard's golf buddy Chuck, who'd always been a gossip, had recorded the hotel footage on his phone and shared it with friends. From there, it spread like wildfire through social media, local news outlets, and the kind of neighborhood gossip networks that could destroy reputations faster than any professional scandal. Retired judge's affair with stepson's wife exposed at birthday party, read the headline in Monday's newspaper. The article included quotes from unnamed sources who'd attended the celebration, describing the shock and horror of watching a respected family implode in real time. My phone had been ringing constantly since Saturday night, reporters wanting comments, friends expressing sympathy or morbid curiosity, distant relatives suddenly interested in family drama they'd ignored for years. I'd stopped answering after the 15th call. Sandra had moved out Sunday morning, taking only a few suitcases and leaving her key on the kitchen counter. No note, no explanation, no attempt at reconciliation. Just the practical acknowledgement that our marriage was over. Richard, according to Mom, had packed his bags and disappeared to parts unknown. His law firm had already issued a statement distancing themselves from their former partner, and the country club had quietly suspended his membership pending internal review. "It's like he never existed," Mom said during our Tuesday lunch. She looked fragile, older, but there was steel in her voice that hadn't been there before. 20 years of marriage and he just vanished. "Probably for the best," I replied, pushing salad around my plate. Facing the music was never Richard's strong suit. The phones won't stop ringing. Reporters, neighbors, people I haven't spoken to in years, suddenly wanting to check on me. It's humiliating. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "It'll die down eventually. Something else will happen. Some other scandal will capture everyone's attention." "Will it, though? This isn't just gossip, Michael. This is the kind of story people remember. The judge who destroyed his family for his stepson's wife. They'll be talking about this for years." She was probably right. In a city our size, scandals like this became part of local folklore, stories passed down through generations of dinner party conversations. But that had been the point, hadn't it? Public humiliation was often more devastating than any legal consequence. Richard and Sandra had cared deeply about their reputations, their social standing, their carefully constructed images of respectability. Destroying those things was more painful than any financial settlement or custody arrangement. My phone buzzed with a text from Alistair Finch. "Need to meet. New developments." We arranged to meet at the same coffee shop where he'd first shown me the evidence of Sandra's affair. Finch arrived looking grimmer than usual, carrying a manila envelope that had become depressingly familiar. "Your stepfather's been busy," he said without preamble, sliding photographs across the table. "Hired his own investigator, apparently, trying to dig up dirt on you." The photos showed me leaving Finch's office, meeting with divorce attorneys, having lunch with Ray Martinez. Nothing incriminating, but clear evidence that I'd been planning my counterattack for weeks. "He's building a case that you orchestrated this whole thing," Finch continued. "Premeditated public humiliation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. His lawyer thinks they might have grounds for a lawsuit. I laughed, surprising myself with the bitterness of the sound. He's suing me for exposing his affair? Stranger things have happened. Rich, powerful men don't like being made to look foolish. They tend to fight back with whatever weapons they have available. Let him try. I've got months of documented evidence that he was screwing my wife. Good luck explaining that to a jury. There's something else, Finch said, his expression growing more serious. Your wife's been making some interesting moves. Cleaned out your joint savings account yesterday, filed papers to claim half the house. Looks like she's not going quietly. The news hit me like a physical blow. Sandra was fighting back, using the legal system to salvage whatever she could from our destroyed marriage. After months of lies and betrayal, she was now positioning herself as the wronged party, entitled to compensation for the dissolution of our relationship. Can she do that? I asked. Depends on your prenup if you have one, community property laws, how vindictive she wants to get. Finch shrugged. Divorce is war by other means, and your wife just declared hostilities. I spent the rest of the week meeting with lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors, trying to protect whatever assets I could before Sandra's legal team could claim them. It was exhausting, expensive, and emotionally draining, but necessary preparation for the battle ahead. The social consequences were almost as challenging. Friends and colleagues didn't know how to act around me. Some offered sympathy and support. Others seemed to view me with suspicion, as if my willingness to publicly destroy my own family made me dangerous or unpredictable. You did what you had to do, Ray said over drinks Thursday evening. Anyone in your position would have done the same thing. Would they? Sometimes I wonder if I should have just filed for divorce quietly, handled it through lawyers instead of turning it into a public spectacle. And let them get away with it? Let them control the narrative, paint you as the bad guy who couldn't satisfy his wife? Ray shook his head. No way. They made their choices. They can live with the consequences. But the consequences were spreading beyond Sandra and Richard. Mom was struggling with depression and social isolation. Extended family members were choosing sides, creating rifts that might never heal. Even my work was suffering as colleagues whispered about my personal drama, and clients wondered if my emotional state would affect my professional judgment. Friday afternoon brought another unwelcome surprise. Sandra appeared at my office, looking haggard but determined. She'd lost weight, and her usually perfect appearance showed signs of stress and sleepless nights. We need to talk, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk without waiting for an invitation. I think we've said everything that needs saying. Have we? Because from where I'm sitting, you've destroyed both our lives for the sake of revenge. Was it worth it, Michael? Was proving your point worth losing everything we built together? The audacity was breathtaking. Sandra sitting in my office, lecturing me about the consequences of my actions while conveniently ignoring her own role in creating this disaster. I didn't destroy anything, I replied calmly. You did that when you decided to sleep with my stepfather. I just made sure everyone knew about it. It wasn't supposed to happen, it just did. These things are complicated, Michael. Adult relationships are messy and difficult, and sometimes people make mistakes. Mistakes? You had an affair for months. You lied to me every day, humiliated me in front of our friends and family, made me look like a fool while you played house with Richard. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. Sandra's composure cracked slightly, tears gathering in her eyes. I never meant to hurt you. I know you don't believe that, but it's true. I love you, Michael. I've always loved you. You have a strange way of showing it. Richard made me feel special, appreciated, like I was the most important person in his world. When was the last time you made me feel that way? And there it was, the justification, the rationalization that allowed Sandra to reframe her betrayal as my failure. I hadn't appreciated her enough, hadn't made her feel special, so naturally she'd had no choice but to seek validation elsewhere. So this is my fault? I asked. I drove you into Richard's arms by not being sufficiently attentive? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that marriages are complicated, that people have needs that sometimes aren't being met at home. I'm not excusing what I did, but I'm trying to help you understand why it happened. I understand perfectly. You're selfish, entitled, and willing to destroy other people's lives for your own gratification. Richard offered you something exciting and forbidden, and you decided you deserved to have it regardless of the consequences. Sandra flinched as if I'd slapped her. That's not fair. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Was it fair to my mother when you were screwing her husband? Was it fair to me when you were lying to my face every day? Was it fair to our marriage when you decided Richard was more important than the vows you made? I made mistakes, Sandra admitted. But what you did at that party was cruel, vindictive. You could have handled this privately, through lawyers and mediation. Instead, you chose to humiliate us in front of everyone we know. The same way you humiliated me for months while I was too trusting to see what was happening right in front of me. We stared at each other across my desk, two people who'd once loved each other now separated by an ocean of betrayal and recrimination. Sandra looked smaller somehow, diminished by the consequences of her choices. What do you want, Sandra? Why are you here? I want us to try to end this with some dignity intact, work out a fair settlement, divide our assets equitably, maybe even try to salvage some kind of friendship from the wreckage. Friendship? The word tasted bitter. You think after everything you've done, everything you've destroyed, that we can be friends? We were married for 12 years, Michael. That has to count for something. It counted for everything. Until you decided it counted for nothing. Sandra gathered her purse and stood to leave, her movements careful and deliberate. At the door, she turned back one final time. I hope someday you can forgive me. Not for my sake, but for yours. All this anger, this need for revenge, it's going to eat you alive if you let it. After she left, I sat alone in my office, staring out the window at the city skyline. Sandra was probably right about the anger. It had become a constant companion over the past few weeks, a cold fire that burned in my chest and colored every interaction, every decision. But forgiveness felt impossible. How do you forgive someone who systematically destroyed everything you believed about your life? How do you move past betrayal so complete, so calculated, that it called into question every happy memory you'd shared? My phone rang, interrupting my brooding. Mom's number appeared on the screen. I need to see you, she said without preamble. Can you come over? There's something we need to discuss. I found Mom in her living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes and photo albums. She'd been packing, I realized, sorting through 20 years of marriage, deciding what was worth keeping and what could be discarded along with her memories of Richard. I'm selling the house, she announced. I can't stay here anymore. Too many memories, too many reminders of how foolish I was. You weren't foolish, Mom. You were trusting. There's a difference. Is there? I ignored the signs, made excuses, convinced myself that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. That sounds pretty foolish to me. She handed me a photo album, its pages filled with images from happier times. Richard and Mom on their wedding day, family vacations, holiday celebrations, the visual history of a marriage that had been built on lies. I found something, Mom said quietly. Something you need to see. She led me to Richard's former study, where she'd been going through his papers and personal effects. On the desk sat a stack of documents that made my stomach clench with recognition. Financial records, bank statements, investment portfolios. He's been stealing from me, Mom said, her voice hollow with disbelief. For years, moving money from our joint accounts into private investments, taking out loans against the house without my knowledge. I thought we were comfortable, but it turns out most of our assets are gone. I flipped through the documents, my engineering mind automatically calculating the scope of Richard's financial deception. It was extensive, systematic, and devastating. He'd essentially been embezzling from his own wife while conducting an affair with mine. How much? I asked. Nearly everything. The retirement accounts, the investments, even the equity in this house. He mortgaged our future to fund his secret life. The magnitude of Richard's betrayal was staggering. Not content with destroying our family emotionally, he'd also been systematically stealing from the woman who'd loved and trusted him for 2 decades. We need to call the police, I said. This is fraud, embezzlement. He can't just steal your money and disappear. Can't he? He's a former judge, Michael. He knows the system, knows how to hide assets and cover his tracks. By the time we could prove anything, he'll be long gone with whatever he managed to steal. But Mom was wrong about one thing. Richard hadn't disappeared completely, and I was beginning to form a plan that would make his public humiliation at the birthday party look like a gentle warning shot. If Richard wanted to play dirty, I was ready to show him just how dirty the game could get.